All righty. So for those who were not with us last week, we are covering the book of Habakkuk, or Habakkuk, depending on who you talk to. I will probably be jumping between several pronunciations since I've been fighting 20 some odd years of saying it one way and finally learning how to say it the right way. So we're going to do a quick summary or recap of what we did last week. We went through a brief, not really brief, we did a summary of what actually was going on throughout the book of Habakkuk because we were trying to get an idea of what does the book actually say, because we more than likely haven't read it since last Robert Roberts' Bible reading. That was probably the last time most of us had read it, and so therefore we just did a brief summary talking about a couple main points throughout the verses. We also then talked about the timeline of where Habakkuk was probably written, what would have been an interesting aspect in relation to all of that. And we basically kind of came away with the idea that it was sometime before Babylon invades Jerusalem that this is all being written. Once again, I'm very much a person who desires interaction, conversation throughout these classes, and we are all learning with each other. This is a multifaceted gem that we can all see from different angles, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say about this. And again, I'm hoping to understand who Habakkuk was, his mission, and his role as a prophet, and how to apply that as followers of Christ, so that it's not just simply an intellectual discussion or understanding, but let's say, what can we actually use in our life from these words? Ultimately, finding Jesus in everything, and then to make this engaging, interactive, and enjoyable. So if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, things that you want us to look into throughout the course of the next couple of weeks, that would be great. Just let me know. I know not everyone is comfortable talking on the microphone, so even if you want to shoot me an email or talk to me later afterwards, I'm all for it. All right? Let's see here. We compared him to Zephaniah in relation to the level of information. All we know about Habakkuk is that his name, and that was he was relaying an oracle or lesson from God. And last class, there was a question about the Chaldeans versus the Babylonians, and I was able to spend a little bit of time this week looking that up. I'm just curious if anyone has any knowledge on their part in relation to Chaldea versus Babylon, or anything that they have known about that they would like to say at this time. All righty, so I'm going to do a little bit of a history section here, just to give us a kind of an idea of what happened. So this is all coming from Britannica. And it says Chaldea was a land in southern Babylonia, modern day southern Iraq, and it is the name that's applied to land bordering the head of the Persian Gulf between the Arabian Desert and the Euphrates Delta. So that is where Chaldea is. And they believe that with the decline of the Assyrian power at that time, people in Chaldea, the great-grandfather or great-grandfather of Nebuchadnezzar, ends up coming from the land of Chaldea, setting up his kingdom in Babylon, and therefore there is that tie between the Chaldeans and Babylon. There's also a difference in that Chaldea, or the Chaldeans, was a term used by more older scholars who did their whole, would call them Chaldeans, while modern scholars call that area in that time frame of empire Neo-Babylon. So there's a slight change from traditional scholars and writers from now. Let's see, what else can I say about this? We also talked a little bit about the idea of Carchemish, and I had not recalled about the Battle of Carchemish. Does anyone else know anything about the Battle of Carchemish? All righty. Joe kind of gave us a little bit of a understanding of what Carchemish was, but I further looked into it. It was basically the pivotal movement that happened. With the Battle of Carchemish, that is when in Scripture, Pharaoh Necho is coming up to save the Assyrians from Babylon. And King Josiah stops that whole battle, or basically delays Pharaoh Necho enough so that Syrians fall and Nebuchadnezzar takes over the entire Assyrian nation. So that is basically what has happened. And I believe, based off the timeline, that it is probably likely that when Habakkuk was writing everything, it was just during that around 612 to 605 era of time, where he is writing about, and God responds with the whole idea that these Babylonians are coming up, and I'm actually not going to make them just a small nation that's succeeded in taking over Nineveh and taking over Tarshish, but they're now also going to take over the whole entire Assyrian Empire. And so that kind of gives us a little bit of an idea of where things were time-wise. Let's see, what else? Let's see.
On that battle of Carchemish, the ruler of Egypt said, "Don't you know God has asked me to come up and fight?" And so God rules in the kingdoms of men because of the way he sets these things up, weakening one nation by having them fighting a third, so that the overall purpose of the Babylonians taking over everything in the known world would take place.
Right. And what I didn't cover is that the Battle of Carchemish was a very bloody war. Apparently, Nebuchadnezzar used surprise to ultimately decimate the Assyrian and Egyptian army, and that there was just no way for them to ever recover from all of this, and that's why Babylon was so successful in the whole thing. So as I was thinking about this, at least in biblical terms, we were talking about Habakkuk being around near the end of Josiah and into the reign of Jehoiakim during what would have been called the Middle to Late Iron Age, according to some scholars. And let's see. From here, unless there's anything else that people want to say, at least to help give us a background of what was going on with there.
I would just say that, so the Assyrians have destroyed the 10 northern tribes, or taken them off into captivity, and so God used them to judge the 10 northern tribes. And so now you have this desperate plea of the prophets to Judah saying, "You're next if you don't change."
Right.
You saw what happened up north. But of course, they're God's people, the 10 northern tribes, and so God comes full circle at the Assyrians and says, "Yeah, I used you to judge those people, but you dare touch my people, so you're finished." And he used the Babylonians for that task.
Yeah, and we'll see that as God talks about what's going to go on and what's going to occur with the Babylonians. He doesn't say, no, they're more righteous, therefore they're going to actually stay around. No, I'm ultimately going to punish them for the way that they have treated everyone else. And then you also see that mindset, because Jeremiah is contemporary with Habakkuk. So you have that whole opportunity there as well. Now, I think, if our memory serves correctly, Ellen had brought out the idea that in Habakkuk 1 verse 1, we read, this is the oracle, or this is the burden of that Habakkuk the prophet received in a vision. I'm curious if there's any other translations that you all have out there for Habakkuk 1 verse 1 in relation to what type of revelation this is. All righty. No one has any. The question was, how does anyone have anything other than burden or oracle for Habakkuk 1:1, for what does God reveal to him in a vision? There's a couple of main translations. I was just curious if anyone had anything on hand. So basically, it's either been translated as oracle, burden, prophecy, or utterance. And the word is not just related into just talking about a prophecy. It is also used as the word for a burden that a donkey would have to carry, or the burden that a man would have to deal with, right? So it was interesting when I started looking into this word, because I think there is a level of play on words that occurs when God or when certain prophets talk about what they have received from God as being a burden. The word also is used in Proverbs 30 and 31, where it talks about this is the utterance, or this is the thinkings of basically what a smart man had to deal with. The burden shows up, the word burden, that is translated as oracle, shows up throughout Isaiah as in reference to the destruction of Babylon, Moab, Damascus, Egypt, the wilderness, Edom, Arabia, and so on and so forth. Jeremiah talks about it, and also even how the law becomes a burden for the people and how it has been perverted. And it's an interesting thing to think about how when you're talking about dealing with things about the future, the idea of knowing what could be coming, we don't always necessarily think about that as being a burden or something that we would have to deal with. But you see with almost all the prophets, there's an aspect of this is actually something that's heavy. This is actually something that is not easily dealt with, because of the fact that we have now been told this is going to result in the destruction of so-and-so, or this is going to result in a very difficult situation. So I would like to read, or take a moment to just read about Jeremiah 23, verses 30 to 40, and that's going to give us an idea of one of the instances that burden was used in a more comprehensive way. Can I?
Let's start from the back here.
Yes, please. We have Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 30 to 40, and if we want to split it, maybe 5 verses apiece.
I can go to some of them. You said Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 23?
23, verses 30 to 40.
Therefore, behold, I am against the prophets, saith the Lord, that steal my words, every one from his neighbor. Behold, I am against the prophets, saith the Lord, that use their tongues, and say, He saith. Prophesy false dreams, saith the Lord, and do tell them, and cause my people to err by their lies and by their lightness. Yet I sent them not, nor commanded them. Therefore they shall not profit this people at all, saith the Lord. And when this people, or the prophet, or priest, shall ask thee, saying, What is the burden of the Lord? Thou shalt then say unto them, What burden? I will even forsake you, saith the Lord. And as for the prophet, and the priest, and the people that shall say, The burden of the Lord, I will even punish that man and his house. Thus shall you say, every one to his neighbor, and every one to his brother, What hath the Lord answered? And what hath the Lord spoken? And the burden of the Lord shall you mention no more. For every man's word shall be his burden. And you have perverted the words of the living God, and the Lord of hosts our God. Thus shalt thou say to the prophet, What hath the Lord answered thee? And what hath the Lord spoken? But since you say, The burden of the Lord, therefore thus saith the Lord, because you say this word, the burden of the Lord, and I have sent unto you, saying, Ye shall not say the burden of the Lord. Therefore, behold, I, even I, will utterly forget you, and I will forsake you and the city which I gave you and your fathers, and cast you out of my presence. And I will bring an everlasting reproach upon you, and a perpetual shame, which shall not be forgotten.
Thank you, Brother Wayne. With this section, we actually get to see the burden aspect apply both to the prophecies, in aspect to people who have taken what God has told them to do as a great weight and is instead more of a challenge to do than living their life the way that they want. And it's just you fully get to see the way it can be applied in multiple different scenarios. And I just wanted to have this first read so that we get an idea that this is potentially somewhat of what the people would have been dealing with that Habakkuk is writing in his verses 2 to 4. This is kind of a precursor view of what the people's mindsets would have been. That they would have had a negative view towards anything that was coming from God, and they were looking for a more music to their ears, more prosperity type doctrine than what God would have been saying through the actual true prophets, which was, you guys are going to be destroyed if you guys don't change your ways. And now they have this time to change, and they don't choose to change. Perry brought up a great point. It's crazy when you think about what just happened up in Assyria, where with the Syrians and the northern kingdoms, how the northern 10 tribes were all deported for doing similar things. And it's something I hope to actually kind of look into. Is you can look throughout the history of the Jews and you can see that this is a repeating theme of what is the issues that they typically have as a nation, as a core of society. Before I move on to reading verses 2 through 4 of Habakkuk chapter 1, are there any comments or thoughts that were brought out through this last couple minutes? Brother Bill?
Just with regard to the burden of the Lord, I think one of the things the prophets saw things that the way that God saw them. And when you read it back, he begins talking about all the injustices that are taking place. And that was a burden, to be able to look and see how basically the people were ignoring the law and doing what they wanted to. And a lot of the prophets talked about abusing the poor. And they saw this, and that was a burden.
Did you say Paul, or you were saying the prophet seeing the...
Yeah, all the prophets. But the prophets, we think of prophets as seeing the future. Well, what they saw was the reality of what was happening to them around them.
Right.
They saw all the abuses that were taking place, and so that was a burden to have to carry.
I appreciate that point, Bill. They would have seen what it was going to lead to, because no one was going to change. So can I get a reader for verses 2 through 4 of Habakkuk chapter 1?
O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? I even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to hold grievance? for spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Therefore, the law is slack, and judgment doth never go forth, for the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth.
Thank you very much. So we have, I think, about 5 more minutes. And so I'm just curious, what are some of your all's initial reactions to reading what would have been going through Habakkuk's mind as he is yelling out these words to God? How would you have, if you had heard a brother or sister crying out these words, how would that have gone through your head? Is this a right thing? Is this a wrong thing? What stands out to you? What is impactful to you in relation to these words? Brother Perry?
I feel like he probably felt like he was swimming against the current, and the current was getting stronger and stronger. It's amazing that after the time of Josiah, which was this great sort of national reform and everything was going great, how quickly it fell again. And the prophets were aware of that and knew that there was no stopping what was coming, because the hearts of the people, even though Josiah kind of had them under control temporarily, they just snapped back to those evil ways so quickly. And in sort of 2 Kings 23 and 24, it keeps saying, did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. And it's just immediately after Josiah's out of the picture.
That was 23 and 24 of 2 Kings? Right. Appreciate it. I see Brother Wayne in the back.
I guess I read this and I think he's echoing the challenges of essentially every generation that tries to serve God. It seems like the other side wins your whole life. And that's just, it's a false impression because it's very temporal, but it's the challenge of seeing beyond that to what God wants and what God has planned. And it's frustrating at moments, and I think some of this expression here is that coming out, that you say that these things are coming and it just doesn't seem like it. And that's part of holding on till the end, and that's part of the challenge that he's facing.
Right. I see. Brother John, did you have a thought as well?
There's a sadness, I think, and a loneliness also related to this burden that you can certainly hear in all of the prophets, that excuse me, they've been given this great weight of a message to share. And you can also hear that, I think these are all echoes up to Christ, because you can certainly hear that in his sadness towards the end of his ministry. The fact that, as Wayne said, sort of the nature of all of this is that human nature is what it is, and there's great sadness that with all of the intervention of the Lord, and it's a lesson for us as well, with all that we know, as these people knew also, we still don't get it. We still fail, and we still need these words. And you can hear, at least I can, you can hear sort of a sadness in his words.
There is a sadness, yes. I think we're almost at time. Only have a couple more minutes. So is there...
Just thinking about Jeremiah too, he was known as the weeping prophet, and kind of this depression almost he carried from carrying this message. and I'm just kind of thinking about this out loud, but I wonder if sometimes that's kind of a dissonance that they held, holding on to their own values, own ideals that were in contrast with God. Is that what made it a burden versus just the objective heaviness of it? But the other contradiction that I think about with this too is the what Jesus said in Matthew 11, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." It seems kind of contrary there, and maybe if we were to, let go of these, ideals that we personally hold that are in contradiction with God, would that burden then be lighter? Would that be easier?
What was that? Was it Matthew?
I think a lot of it comes down to perspective. Oftentimes we get bogged down by the things that are an onslaught against us, or what we know is going to happen. You see somebody making poor decisions, and it just weighs you down, right? As opposed to changing your mind a little bit and thinking about an opportunity to learn, and hopefully the cost of that learning isn't too great that it destroys the person. And that's the case with Israel here. They have an opportunity to learn and to rededicate themselves, and that's hard for people to watch.
Right. Appreciate it. We'll be spending a little bit more time in these verses next week. So looking forward to seeing y'all a little bit later.